all religions, all worldviews, in fact, start with an assumption about what the big question is. I've done a deep dive into some of these, or a slightly deeper dive, but I'm going to do a very quick version in this one video where I go through them all, like give them 30 seconds each or something. So let's go. Let's start with Judaism. So I think the big question for Jews is, how can we live in relationship with God? The word chesed, or covenant love, is about the covenants, the contract between God and God's people. And so the ultimate assumption is that there is a God, and God is faithful, and God has a relationship. It's not a question about immortality or eternal life or about life after death. Those aren't part of the big question in Judaism. It's about how can we live now lives which reflect our relationship with God. If God is blessing us, how can we bless the world? For Christians, the big question is, how can we be reconciled to God? And so there is a God, that's another assumption in Christianity, and that God and us are separated. They're separated by our sinfulness, our failings, and that we want to get back to be with God, and that is a permanent state we want to be in, that we want to be with God, and we are not at the moment, through prayer, through forgiveness, through ritual. If that's not your question, if you don't believe there is a God, or you think there is a God, but you're not estranged from God, then the big answer for Christians won't make sense to you, because your big question is not the same. And for Islam, it's a different big question. The big question is, how can we live at peace? And behind that, there is an assumption about God, that God has a way that things are, that there are fixed, eternal, immutable, unchangeable laws that God has laid down in the universe, and that when we resist or rebel against those laws, we are in turmoil. So the answer in Islam is submit to God, and there you will find peace. Peace with your neighbor, peace with God, peace with yourself. If you don't share those assumptions that there is a God, or that there are fixed, unchanging laws of the way things are, so like Daoists don't, and we'll come to Daoists later, then that answer doesn't make sense to you, because you don't share the assumptions. And when we don't share the assumptions, then we're not going to be compelled by the answers if it's not our question. Hinduism, very different. It's how can we be reunited with the one true reality, with God in a different sense to Jews, Muslims and Christians think of God. God as both the tailor and the fabric of the universe. So in a sense, the idea of being liberating our soul from our bodies to be reunited with God, is an attempt to uncreate ourselves. God created ourselves out of God's self, and then the answer for Hindus is to uncreate, to go back to being part of that ultimate reality. We are not all travelling up the same mountain, as some well-meaning liberals might say. We're travelling different mountains. Christians are travelling up a mountain to be reconciled to God, Hindus to be part of God. They're different answers to different questions. For Buddhists, different again. Buddhists don't, by and large, believe in God at all. And they don't necessarily believe in any sort of afterlife. They believe in this life right in front of us, and they believe that we all suffer. So the big question for Buddhists is, how can we alleviate suffering? How can we alleviate suffering for ourselves and for one another and for all of nature? And the answer then is very practical. It's answers about the eightfold path, the 8 skills, the virtues, if you like, of Buddhism. For Sikhism, it's a question of how can we live truthful lives? How can we be true? There is an assumption that there is a God, that God is all about truth, that the Waheguru, the great teacher, is teaching us the truth of God's self, that we must know the truth for ourselves and live that truth with integrity ourselves, that we individually are answerable to God. The background to that is very much about challenging religions that exclude people. And so there's an inclusiveness about Sikhism that comes from a faith that developed out of how do we make sure everybody is included. I'm going over my time. Let's look at Taoism then. For Taoism, the big question is, how can we live in harmony with everything, with the Tao, particularly with the way? And the way is not fixed, as it might be in Islam, that the universe and how things are constantly changing, fluid and negotiable. You can't pin it down. And so to live in harmony is to live skillfully in relationship with the way things are, to be constantly aware of the changingness of things. Acupuncture, Qigong, other methods help people answer that question, but that's the question: how can we live in harmony? And for Indigenous religions, how can we survive in an ambivalent nature? How can we basically hack the natural world, hack the system through our relationship with the spirits, with the ancestors, with all of nature? How can we negotiate with the natural world? It's such a different question than the question being asked by Abrahamic faiths like Judaism and Christianity. People think we're all like going up one mountain by different paths. We're not. We're climbing different mountains. And when people get involved in interfaith dialogue, they often wrongly compare answers to what is actually different questions. The starting point is to find out what questions we're trying to answer. And until we do that, we will only be talking over and across each other. So it's really important to find out what these big questions are. It helps us, people of all faiths and good faith, to speak with each other and not over each other. I've got deep dive videos over this. I'll put them in the descriptions and the comments below. Thanks for watching, subscribing, and visiting my channel.